Welcome, everybody. My name's Pauline McMahon, and I work for the Sixsess Consultancy, and I'll be helping out in the background today. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Chris, and we can get started.
Thanks very much, Pauline. I've been talking to CEOs and company founders for over 25 years now, and when I talk to them, I find most are looking for growth, or sometimes it's transformation of some kind, and they're struggling to get it. And the reasons they want this are because they're under pressure, perhaps from their investors or owners or shareholders. But equally, it may be just because they're ambitious and they want to be seen as someone who's leading something good. They want to be admired as someone who is successful. So it can all feel quite personal. And occasionally, of course, it's a little worse than that, and the organization has already started slipping, and sales are in decline, and costs are spiraling upwards. Now, the reasons they're struggling normally fall into a few categories. And the first one is that the market is changing faster than their organizations can keep up. And sometimes it's new technology or perhaps regulations. Maybe this time it's tariffs or energy prices or increasing taxes or AI. There's always something. The second is that either customers are getting more demanding or competitors are starting to beat them out, or both. Because progress is always moving forwards. And so if you're not keeping pace, you're falling behind. And the reasons why their organizations can't keep up are typically because either they're out of ideas and not getting good enough ideas from their teams, or if they have ideas, they can't get everyone on the same page to execute the change. Sometimes people are just outright resistant to change, but other times they're just not aligned and working together effectively. The result of all of this, well, it's frustrating and even overwhelming. And they feel like they're running like crazy and not getting anywhere, constantly fighting fires and just not getting the results they want. And then, as the saying goes, it gets lonely at the top.
Hello, everybody. I'm Barry Eustance, Principal Consultant at the Sixsess Consultancy. Thanks for joining us today. We're here to look at some of the real obstacles that get in the way of business growth, especially in small to medium-sized organizations. These aren't surface-level issues, but the deeper ones that affect direction, momentum, and results. Joining me is Chris Fox, founder of StratNav. Chris has got over 25 years of experience working with leadership teams across sectors, including his time as head of group strategy at a FTSE 100 multinational. Chris has worked with founders, boards, and leadership teams to help them think and act more clearly in challenging environments. Behind the scenes today is Pauline McMahon. We'll speak for around 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open things up for your questions. So, Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Barry. So the problems I described above are pretty pervasive. Almost every leader has experienced them from time to time. And there's no shortage of people telling them what to do about it, talking about strategy, culture, leadership, change management, innovation, etc., etc. And one of the problems with all of these things, like strategy, is that if you ask two different strategists to tell you exactly what strategy actually is, you'll get 3 different answers and 4 different approaches to doing it. And it's really easy to just disappear down a rabbit hole of theory, which never translates into action, much less results. And in the meantime, you've got demanding clients, staff, suppliers, distributors, all demanding your limited time. So it's really easy to see why so many people just kick the can down the road. But one thing you can be sure of is that if you don't do something, and soon, it's only going to get worse. Now, I'm not going to add to that. I'm not going to give you yet another definition of strategy or of anything else. Instead, I want to talk to you about 4 problems you have to solve as a leader. And then I want to suggest how you can go about tackling each of them and some pointers for how to go about solving them. And if you want to call that strategy or anything else, that's great. The 4 problems that every business has and every business needs to tackle to be successful. The first one is to do with the future. Your business needs to be successful in the future. It doesn't matter how successful it's been in the past. Unfortunately, the future is really hard to predict with any certainty. It's impossible, really. In fact, there are only really two things we can know with any certainty about the future. And the first one is that the future will be different from the past. They say the only constant is change. And that means that what made us successful in the past probably won't be what we need to do to succeed in the future. We and our organizations need to change to succeed. And of course, we probably don't need to change everything, but we will need to change some things. And so we need to be able to work out which ones. Secondly, we have to accept that we really can't predict the future. We're really, really bad at it. However, we can anticipate different futures, multiple different futures even, and prepare for them. The legendary Canadian ice hockey player Wayne Gretzky summed it up beautifully when he said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it has been." And this point is beautifully illustrated by a video which shows 100 school kids playing football against 4 professional football players. And if you've watched kids play, you can imagine it's evident that the 100 school kids are all chasing after the ball, while the professionals are looking for the open space and trying to position themselves ahead of the ball moving there. So to get ahead of the pack, as it were, there are 3 things that we need to do. Firstly, we need to understand the present situation and how it's currently changing. So we need to be aware of where the other players are on the pitch and what they're doing and might do. There are a number of different tools we can use to do this in business. So the most widely known is probably the SWOT analysis, but there's also the business model canvas, value chain analysis, PESTLE analysis, 5 forces analysis, 7S analysis, etc., and various different techniques for competitor analysis and portfolio analysis. These tools themselves, they are very useful, but they're not the point. The point is that we take note of the present situation from many different aspects, through many different lenses, and those tools and frameworks provide us with those lenses. Secondly, we need to mine that understanding for insight. And by that, I mean insight as in a new and unique understanding of the way the world works in our industry or business. Now, for some reason, people are often very tempted to skip this, and it can be a little bit tricky, so maybe that's understandable, but it's an absolutely critical step. Now, for example, when I ask leadership teams what their business's strengths are, I often get bland answers like, we've got a really strong brand or a really strong team. And that may be true, but it's really not very insightful. And so I usually probe in 2 directions. And the first one is to ask for tangible evidence. And when I ask that, it usually emerges either that there isn't any. There really is no reason to believe that their brand or team is particularly stronger than anyone else's at all. But the other response you get is you start to get evidence of specific ways in which they're stronger. And it's in those specifics that the value lies. Now, the second question I ask is, so what? Why do those specifics matter to customers or distributors or suppliers? Because if they don't matter, then even if it's true, it's not particularly insightful. There's not much you can do with it. And the same applies to external trends. So someone might identify AI as an opportunity or a threat to their business. But it's not insightful until you can describe the specific and unique ways in which it might be an opportunity or a threat to your business as opposed to anyone else's. Thirdly, we need to use that insight to imagine how things might play out. Now, technically, we call this scenario analysis, but I think it's easier to compare it to what you imagine a science fiction writer does. So a science fiction writer will pick a point in the future and then try to describe what it feels like to live and operate in that future. And then also how our business competes and wins in that future, for example. And then we can also imagine the history, the events that led us to that point. And we can imagine how different players reacted in that story to make it believable. So we end up with an understanding of the plausible consequences of the present situation. Now, the exact details of this will vary widely depending on your specific business. So what's relevant to a legal practice, for example, will be completely different to what's relevant to a manufacturing business. And that's why there is no one-size-fits-all solution for business. And anyone trying to tell you that they have the answer is a snake oil salesman. Note also that we aren't limited to imagining a single future. We can easily imagine and to some extent even prepare for a few different ones. So a UK-based manufacturer could imagine one future in which, say, investment and advances in green tech strengthen supply chains through onshoring and lead to a resurgence in manufacturing. On the other hand, it could also imagine another scenario in which global supply chains fragment as a result of geopolitics, increasing input costs and eroding margins, and in which inflationary pressures constrain demand. And that organization can then evaluate its options, the things it can do right now, against both of those future scenarios. And obviously, the more detailed your assessment of the current situation and future scenarios is, the better you will be able to prepare for the future. The second of the four problems is to do with focus. Now, in my experience, if you get half a dozen halfway intelligent people into a room, they will quickly come up with a long list of things you could or even should do. And if you've done a thorough job of understanding the future, you'll probably come up with even more. And that's really the easy part. The problem with this is that whilst you can probably do almost any of them, you almost certainly can't and shouldn't try to do all of them. And that's because you have time, budget, and resource constraints. Most organizations are already stretched, delivering products and services and fighting fires. And if you start laying on more stuff to do, you can easily overwhelm everyone. And that makes the situation worse, not better. And it's a trap that so many leaders find themselves in. I often remind people that you get paid for finishing things, not for starting them. And most organizations would do better by starting fewer things and finishing more of them more quickly. Of course, that presupposes you start the right things. And so the challenge becomes to identify the smallest number of things that will have the biggest impact. And this is known as the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. Now, unfortunately, most people, when they can't choose between two options, either end up trying to do neither or both. And the truth is, you're almost always better choosing one, even if it's by a coin toss, and completing it. Another big challenge is working out what to stop doing in order to create the capacity you need to do the things you need to start doing. Now, you can achieve this with a fairly simple start, stop, continue exercise. And you can also prioritize and sequence things. You don't need to do everything all at once. And it's your analysis of the future that creates the context in which you need to make these choices. As the saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. In general terms, you need to stop doing the things that are likely to become less important in the future, start doing the things that are likely to become more important in the future, and keep doing the things that are least likely to change. And we typically do this by writing vision statements and then setting goals, objectives, and KPIs. But the key thing is that these should make it crystal clear what we are prioritizing, as well as what we're not. And it's that second part that so often gets left out. The third problem is to do with alignment. Simply knowing what you want isn't enough. You have to take steps to actually get it. And in organizations, that usually requires people, often large numbers of people, to work together. And that can be surprisingly hard. It can feel like herding cats. It can feel like people are actively working against each other. And sometimes to be brutally honest, they are, either by accident or even worse, on purpose, because they want different things or have different ideas about the best way to go about getting them. And there are four underlying challenges here. So the first one is that people just don't understand what it is you actually want them to do. For example, who needs to do what and by when. And this is basically a problem of planning or project management or coordination. And if it's not clear, then people will either do nothing or they'll guess. And if they guess, then you shouldn't be surprised if sometimes they guess differently to what you want them to. That's the easy part there. The second challenge is that people need to understand why you want them to do something, because people aren't automatons. You can tell them what to do and you can pay them to do it, and that will work to a certain extent. But it's just not good enough to achieve real substantial change. For that, you need people to buy in, not just to what needs to be done, but also why it's the best thing to do now. And that goes back to your understanding of the future and your determination of the focus. It probably goes without saying that if people have a different view of what the future is going to look like, then they're very unlikely to agree about the best way to prepare for it. So you need to develop a shared view of that future or those futures. And ideally, you involve them in the process leading to this point. But if you didn't or couldn't, you need to explain to them why they need to do whatever it is, preferably in a way that makes it clear what's in it for them. Thirdly, even if you tell them the first two things, people just forget. Real life, day-to-day challenges and distractions get in the way. And when people are stressed, when they're under pressure, they tend to revert to what's comfortable. And in practice, that means they go back to doing whatever it was they've always done, not what you want them to do now. So you need to remind people, and you need to do it often. The fourth one is that things inevitably change. And when they do, we need to face up to them and say, that didn't work out the way I thought it would, so we're going to change it. Unfortunately, though, when things don't go to plan, I often see that people just double down on them. And, perhaps it's because we're embarrassed to be seen to have made a mistake, or perhaps we simply haven't gone back to check our original assumptions. But we need to be able to check our egos at the door, to face our mistakes, and treat them as the learning opportunities that they are. So future focus and alignment aren't a one and done. We need to constantly revise and reconsider them. And again, there are numerous tools that we use for establishing, communicating, and managing plans. One thing that I would add, though, it's really important to establish a cadence for regular communications and updates. And a cadence helps everyone understand how to work together. And the analogy I use, it's much like a marching band has a drummer to keep everyone in time, or a rowing 8 has a cox to direct everyone. There needs to be that regular pattern of communication and update to keep everything in place. The fourth of the four problems has to do with results. It doesn't matter how clever or well-intentioned you are. Things may still turn out as you hope, or they may not. The future can turn out differently to what you'd anticipated. Competitors can surprise and outmaneuver you. Staff and suppliers and distributors can let you down. Or equally, things may go better than planned. So it's vital to keep an eye on the results. Keeping a close eye on the results is what creates the opportunity for learning and continuous improvement. Now, results tell you that the things you plan to do are achieving the outcome you hope to achieve. Now imagine watching a game of football or rugby without a clear system of keeping score. It would quickly degenerate from a highly competitive, exciting sports challenge to a bunch of people kicking a ball around. And it's interesting that leaders often complain that their workers are disengaged, but those same workers go home at the weekend and transform into raging fans for their local sports teams. And I think there may be a lesson in there. if you put in all this effort, you really want to know if it's working. Are you getting the results you'd hoped for? Because if you're not, there is a little point in simply keeping on going. There's a saying, often misattributed to Einstein, that the definition of madness is repeating the same thing and expecting a different result. So if you're not getting the result, then your understanding of the future, or what you should focus on to be successful, or how you will achieve it, was off somewhere. So you need to revisit the entire process. And it's seldom that you were completely right or wrong. More often, it's about constant adjustment. I like to think of it like a heat-seeking missile that's tracking a moving target, rather than like a high-powered rifle, which you get one shot after you pull the trigger to either hit the target or not. Now, if you solve these 4 problems, your chances of success go up significantly. And this is essentially what people talk about when they talk about business strategy. Now, they used to talk about strategy as if it was a linear process. First, you develop it, then you execute it. 2 separate steps, sometimes even done by 2 completely different groups of people. And hopefully you can see that that's not the case. It's much more of a circular process, a constant evolution, with the results feeding back into your understanding of how the future is unfolding. You're solving each of these 4 problems on an ongoing basis, with what you learn each time feeding forward into the next iteration. Now, I've spent 25 years trying to master these processes, working with clients ranging from founders through startups and SMEs to enterprise-sized organizations, and applying it to my own business as well. And so I'm really excited to have been able to share this experience with you all and for what Barry's about to say next. Barry, can I hand back to you?
Many thanks, Chris. What we've covered today are 4 areas that tend to block progress, not always visibly, but consistently. While it's possible to work around them for a time, tackling them directly creates far more headroom for growth. If what you've heard today reflects your own experience, or if it's prompted you to re-examine how things are working in your business, then I would encourage you to go a step further. Our Business Growth Masterclass for founders and leaders of small to medium-sized businesses is intended to take you deeper into these challenges with the structures, tools, and space to work on them directly. You can find full details on the link shown on the screen and also the QR code. I'll give you just a minute or so to grab your camera and use the QR code. So it remains for me to ask Pauline to provide us with the questions that have been put by our attendees into the chat and by the forward questions that were sent prior to the webinar. Pauline, over to you.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Barry and Chris. That was so we've had a couple of questions in today, and also, as you said, there was a few that were sent in advance. So we'll start with a question we've got here from Gavin. Okay, he says, "Hi, Gavin here. Great food for thought. Just wondering, how often would you recommend revisiting our strategy and assumptions?"
Thanks, Pauline, and thanks, Gavin. This is an area of strategy which I think has changed significantly in recent years. And it used to be, as I mentioned, it used to be a linear process done around fixed timeframes. So typically organizations, I mean, long ago they used to do it on 5-year cycles, more recently on 1-year cycles. But you'd have a 1-year planning cycle, and it was often linked to organization budgetary processes. And it would typically be something like, September you review the strategy, and then October you do the business planning, and then you do all your resourcing, and you sign off your plan for the new year. But of course, I think everyone's realized that there's a fundamental flaw in this approach, and that is that the real world doesn't conform to your planning cycle. And so I always used to joke with clients, if you want to launch a major new initiative, just find out when your big competitor's planning cycle finishes and launch the day after that, because that gives you almost a full year before they replan how to respond to it. And of course, when tariffs come in or a war starts or any material event happens in the environment, it's not tied to your planning cycle. So doing a strategy and setting a plan at a particular time in the year and then trying to hold it constant for the year is just a fundamentally flawed process. And that's why this is much more about a continuous evolution through those four processes. So you need systems in place to monitor your results on a regular basis. I would say at a minimum monthly, and in a lot of businesses weekly. Are you getting the results you want? As well as have environmental scanning processes in place. So people are constantly watching the environment, and there's a well-developed channel for someone to say, I've been watching this in the environment. This has happened, which I think is significant, and we need to review it. So there needs to be a well-defined channel for escalating that for review. And, if as a result of either of those factors, you need to change your strategy, change it now. Don't wait for your annual planning cycle. And of course, I think the reason why we had annual planning cycles is because this was very different. It's the same reason why the accountants used to close the books only once a year, because it was inordinately difficult to do. Whereas now with accounting software, they can almost do a fast close on any day, and you have real-time information. And we're now developing that in the strategy arena as well. So tools like StratNav app will help you manage your strategy much more in a live manner, a continuous and live manner, rather than this sort of slightly antiquated annual planning process.
Many thanks, Chris. Very, very useful. Pauline, other questions?
So I'm currently in the process of planning and forecasting for the next 2 years. How do I avoid overanalyzing multiple scenarios?
Again, one for you, Chris, I think. Yes.
Yeah, great question. And again, one of the criticisms that's been leveled at strategy is this sort of over-analysis. In fact, the term was always paralysis by analysis, that organizations spent so long thinking about their strategies that they never actually got around to doing anything, which of course is not very helpful. So, there's a couple of ways to do it, and I would probably draw your attention back to what I was talking about, thinking about it like a science fiction author, about writing a story about the future. That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to analyze everything just because it's there to be analyzed. You're trying to analyze the things that might be relevant to those stories that you're telling about the future. And if you imagine, if you're writing a science fiction story about the future, you're only going to include the things that are most relevant to the story that you're trying to do. I always joke that there's not many stories that talk about the hero brushing their teeth, right? Now, I mean, they probably do brush their teeth, but it's just not relevant to the story, so it gets left out. And that's the balance that you're trying to do. You're trying to get enough information to tell a story that's going to compel change. And part of that as well is how many stories do you need? So when doing scenarios, we typically talk about having more than one scenario because, as I said, you can't predict the future. And if you only have one scenario, it's like you're predicting that that's going to happen, and you can't do that. So you almost always need more than one as a number. I typically say, well, 2 is a number more than 1, but it's kind of only 1 more than 1. You probably need a bit more than that. And then if you get to more than about 4 or 5 stories, you're probably overcomplicating things, right? And more than 4 or 5 stories, it's kind of hard for people to remember the stories and to engage with them, and so they just become background noise. So 4 stories is a good benchmark, and one of the approaches that I use when I'm doing this, and that's again something that's built into StratNav app as a technique, is if you pick the 2 unknowns about the future that you judge to be the least certain and the highest impact, and that's a value judgment. But if you pick those 2 items and you look at least 2 outcomes for each of those. So let's say one of the things is political uncertainty. You're worried about the geopolitical outcome of the situation between, say, Trump and China, right? So then you can say you can pick two outcomes. So one outcome is that the geopolitical tensions escalate, and the other outcome is that they come to some sort of agreement and things calm down again. So you pick two outcomes for each of those two key uncertainties, and that gives you a 2x2 matrix, if you like. So four scenarios. Covering the four combinations of outcomes from that. And then you populate each of those scenarios with the background from all of the other uncertainties that have come through for your analysis to try and tell those four stories. And you get to four stories that people can engage in and say, yeah, I can imagine these things happen, and I can imagine the players playing them out in that way, and that becomes a good grounding for analysis. You don't need to analyze things to death and predict. You don't need to, you can talk about the trade war between America and China escalating without doing a spot forecast of the dollar price in 5 years' time. You don't need that level of detail, right? You just need to understand the basic story of how the world would be if it got worse.
Thanks, Chris. And I'd add to that we constantly spend our time working with clients and how to simplify their thinking. Having a structured tool that allows you to do that is massively helpful. That's why we use StratNav app every day with our clients. And it's that structured thinking that actually gives the clarity and simplicity of thought that actually allows the analysis to be effective. Pauline, do we have more questions?
Yes, there's another question here. I run a small digital agency. You talked about tools such as SWOT analysis. I am familiar with that, but what about the other tools I should be aware of? What would you recommend as a starting point for a small digital agency? And are there any good resources you would recommend?
I know what I'd say, but over to you, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's there's two answers to that. So the first one is those tools. The tools I've been talking about. They're built into StratNav app, and StratNav app has got online guidance and AI to help you select the tools that you want to use, to work your way through each of them, and to and to stitch the story together across the models. Loads of online guidance. It's got AI to help you do it. And the answer is you don't need to do all of them because, as I said, no two situations are the same. But the tool will help you select and guide you through those. And then, of course, the second part of the answer is, as Barry mentioned, we are running our business growth masterclass, and the intention there is to go through those tools, not as an academic exercise. It's not about someone standing up and lecturing you about those tools. It's about rolling up your sleeves in the session and working through the models for your own business under our guidance. Those are the two recommendations. I mean, I can't answer the question in more detail than that without talking on for several hours, unfortunately. But that's what the masterclass is designed to deliver for you.
And I'd add to that the purpose of the masterclass is that the attendees will walk away with the beginnings of their own strategic plan that they can then take away, work on, develop, work with us, because we'll be following that up with our attendees so that we help them to develop and move that into a live strategic planning tool so that they can actually have the visibility, measure the results, and execute effectively. Pauline, any further questions from the floor, please?
Yes, so there's a question we received from David. What are the signs that our current strategy isn't working?
That's a very wide question, and I'll definitely lob that over the fence to Chris. Chris, what are the signs?
So I think, in the simplest terms, the signs are you're not getting the results you want. It almost doesn't matter what the results are, but if the result you want is growth or transformation or whatever it is, if you're not getting that, that's a sign your strategy is not working. So And that's why that focus on results is so important. It's absolutely essential that you've translated your focus areas I mentioned into goals, objectives, and then KPIs, measurable KPIs that you can track, and that will tell you if it's not working. Not only will it tell you it's not working, but it'll give you the first clues, because if your KPIs are set up correctly, and the way that we typically do it up is the KPIs would be set up as an hypothesis of causes and effects, and so you'd be able to work backwards through the KPIs, and it'll give you clues, not only that it is going wrong, but also where it's going wrong, and then of course you're feeding that back into the process, as I mentioned, in that circular process, and it's absolutely, you want to be keeping an eye on this all the time, as I said, monthly at least, if not weekly. I can't tell you the number of times I have been approached by a CEO for help with their strategy, and you look at it, and the first thing you say is, it would have been so much better if we'd started this a year ago, when those signs were first evident. And so you've got to have that measurement system in place, checking the results. And as I said, you've got to check your ego at the door. Don't just look at it and say, and bury your head in the sand, because your ego is attached to your strategy. Don't just plow on, but recognize that it's gone wrong and take immediate steps to address it.
Thank you, Chris. And I'd add to that, this isn't a problem confined only to small to medium-sized enterprises. And for jargon buster, by the way, KPIs are key performance indicators for those who weren't aware. We've seen the problem of, if you like, being self-effacing and being honest about whether strategies are working, manifest themselves in really substantial organizations, very, very large businesses, where people have allowed themselves to believe their own hope rather than their own reality. And the measurement of that reality is available and should be available to every organization. And those key performance indicators, the KPIs, should be indicators of when it's time to consider the strategy and be honest. Is it working? If it's not working, what do we do about it? And actually getting there early is the best remedy to making sure that those objectives are achieved. I'm conscious of time. I'm getting the 5-minute warning from the system. So, Pauline, any further questions?
Actually, I have a question. So, Chris, you mentioned that there are 4 problems every business must solve, but how would they know which one to start with their organization?
Yeah, so a great question. So the first thing is, you want to be working on all of them almost in parallel. You want to get away from this, we'll do all the thinking first and all the acting later. Right. So you want to be trying to focus on all of them, and that's why you need a cadence, right? So you're continuously revolving around them. But having said that, just being more practical, I mean, I would always start with your understanding of the future and work your way through them in the order in which I presented them, just because I think there's an inherent logic. If you don't understand the future, it's very hard to do any of the other steps. Now, you don't have to wait until your understanding of the future is sort of 100% and crystal clear before you move on to the other steps, for 2 reasons. One is because you need to move, you need to be doing things. The world is happening right now, so you can't wait. But the other reason, of course, is you will never be 100% clear. So as long as you can say we've taken steps, we're a little bit clearer, and now we're going to work our way through those steps to make sure that little bit more clarity that we have is having an impact on the business, and then go around and get a little bit more clearer again. And so it's a process of constant improvement rather than sort of a big bang, if you like.
Absolutely. And a further point to add, in addition to complete honesty, it's also about not striving for perfection, but actually striving for a realizable future that can be achieved in a reasonable time frame. So, Pauline, I hope we've answered everybody's questions for the moment. For anybody else who's got questions, those who'll be seeing the podcast and webinar at a later date on the various media in which it'll be posted, please do feel free to contact us. The links are all there. Sixsess.org is the website, and client services at sixsess.org will also get you an answer very rapidly. So invite you again to join our Business Growth Masterclass. The links below and the QR code will take you there. Thank you for those who attended us in person. Thanks for those who are watching in the future. We look forward to speaking to you, working with you, and being of service to you in the very near future. Thank you very much from Chris and from me and the Sixsess Consultancy and all the team who've made this webinar possible. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.